Good afternoon. I'm sure all of you have heard of Mowgli, you know, the little boy who grew up in the jungles with a pack of wolves, and he always wore a little chaddi. I had a similar childhood, actually, and my parents wisely thought that as a girl, I should also additionally put on a vest. The other thing that my parents very wisely did was instill in me as I grew up that as a human being, we cannot merely just consume the planet's resources. We need to constantly make an attempt to give back at least as much as what we get from the world. And it was not just something that they said with words. It was something that they put in action. My dad sponsored the education of several kids whose parents otherwise couldn't afford it. My mother poured herself into the active running of a children's home for destitute boys, becoming to several of them the mother that they did not have. What would trigger in me the same need and desire to do something, I often wondered. But as a young person, I continued to do what most young people would do, but I always had a dog by my side. 3 years ago, something happened that changed the course of my life. Mrs. Menaka Gandhi secured the release of 102 beagles from a testing laboratory here in Bangalore. CUPA, Compassion Unlimited Plus Action, a city-based NGO, was entrusted with the responsibility of rehoming these beagles. Beagles are a small breed of dog, extremely intelligent and strong-willed. They are used originally by hunters to help them track down prey because of their acute sense of smell. Beagles, unfortunately, are also the dog breed of choice in animal testing laboratories across the world. From pesticides, chemicals, pharmaceutical drugs, cosmetics, everything is tested on these animals. Pictures of these dogs that needed homes started to make their appearance on social media. I was already running Pupcake by then, my little bakery for dogs, and my business page had a fairly large following of a dog-loving community. I started using my page to actively campaign for the cause of these beagles, and through the concerted efforts of everybody involved, slowly all these dogs started going home. There were 2 dogs, however, who were still at the CUPA office who hadn't yet found families. There was a boy and a girl. Armed with my camera, I went over to take their pictures, to market them, and to help them get adopted. I was led out to the yard at the back, where the dogs were kept. I went in and I sat down on the ground, still, not making eye contact with them, not moving, giving them an opportunity to get used to my presence. The dogs were terrified. Their tails were firmly tucked in between their legs. They were cowering as close as possible to the ground in an attempt to make themselves appear smaller than they were. They had spent their entire lives in tiny metal cages with no external stimulation whatsoever. The only interaction they had with human beings was when the metal cage was opened, hands reached in to pull them out and experiment upon them. After a while, the little girl came almost crawling towards me, licked my toes and scampered off. She did this a few times. And after I don't know how long, she gathered what I can only imagine to be humongous amounts of courage to crawl into my lap and settle down. I cannot even begin to describe the emotions that washed over me as I felt the thudding heart of that little girl against my foot. And even though as a family, we were not prepared to bring home a second dog, there was no way I was leaving this girl behind. And she came home with me the very next day. She was a few kilos underweight. She had shabby, scanty fur. Her body reeked of a chemical odor that did not go for months despite baths. She had injection marks all over her limbs from having been poked and prodded her entire life. Her only identity was a number, 8699640, a number that was tattooed inside her ear. This little girl of mine came home, and we call her Sasha. When she first came home, every household sound that you and I take for granted would send her into a panic mode. The sound of a cooker whistle going off, curtains being drawn, spoon dropped somewhere, or even the sound of a laugh. Any movement, even though not intended for her. For example, if you reached out to pick up a glass of water and she happened to be anywhere in the room, she would cower and start drooling with utmost anxiety. She did not know to climb the stairs. She walked around in circles with her head bowed down for weeks, even at nights, because that was the only movement she knew for the 4 years that she had existed unknown in that laboratory cage. She watched our other dog, Calvin, and slowly started to learn what it meant to be a dog. She started enjoying going for walks, playing with her treats, but the most important thing she learned was this, that human hands from this point on would never reach out to harm her, but they would reach out only to love and pet her. I was watching TV once, and from the corner of my eye, I could see her playing with her little ball, and the ball rolled under the couch. It had been a couple of months since she had been home by then. She tried to pull out the ball with her paws for a really long time, and when she couldn't reach it, she came in front of me, went into, the little play bow that those of you who have dogs will know, bum sticking up in the air, her tail was wagging, and her mouth was opening and shutting as if to bark, but there was no sound. Vet said that her vocal cords had been cut off. She had been debarked, a common procedure in laboratories to prevent an animal from screaming in pain. But nothing stood in the way of this little girl putting one paw in front of another and learning to be a free dog. If you meet her today, stubborn, confident, with such a strong mind, you would not believe the trauma that she came from. And this is us after we finished a trek in Sakleshpur, a big outdoorsy girl who loves to explore the world. As I was helping this scared little creature transform into all that she could be, there was a huge transformation that was taking place within me as well. Even though I had always grown up with dogs, I've always had dogs, I love dogs, etc., for the first time in my life, I was experiencing unconditional love in my relationship with the dog, but for the first time, I was not at the receiving end of it. For weeks and months, I was pouring myself into this dog, getting nothing in return, not even the wag of a tail for a really long time. And from this unconditional love came compassion. Compassion is often mistaken with the word pity, which is very degrading for anybody who's at the receiving end of it. So I scouted around for a definition of compassion that resonates with the way I feel about it. And compassion can be described as deep awareness of the suffering of another accompanied by the wish to relieve it. It is also a noun. But in my relationship with Sasha, this noun became a verb in my life. It became active. It became alive. And it caused a ripple effect. And before long, I knew that I had to reach out to help more dogs in need who were down on their luck and who needed a hand to hold. I started actively volunteering at shelters, giving my time, my money, my energy, everything that I had. And just as my life by now had started to go to the dogs, so was my Facebook timeline. I was using every opportunity I had to talk about the enriching experience of living with a rescued dog. And this is at Cupa Second Chance, one of my favorite places in the world. And as I was talking to people, this is what I had to say. If Sasha could do it, from the trauma that she came from, any dog could. Most of the dogs that come to us are not even traumatized dogs. Most of them have been given up for selfish human reasons. Getting married, having a baby, moving out of the city, any big life change in a human being's life, the dog is the first to be eliminated from the family structure. Most of the dogs that come to us have come to us because they got too big, the children got too bored, or simply because they got too old. Taking a dog through a journey from rescue to rehoming involves an enormous effort. The dog first needs to be removed from an unsafe environment. It could be the streets where they're often dumped. It could be an abusive home where they're tied up and beaten, or it could be simply a home that no longer wants it. The dog is then placed in a secure environment, which is a shelter or a foster home, which is nothing but a temporary home that families provide to dogs till such time that they get adopted. The dogs go to the vets to get medical examination, vaccination, sterilization. There are so many people that drive the dogs in their own cars to and fro from vets. There are so many people that dig into their pockets all the time and give us money to fund our efforts. And finally come in the adopters who take these dogs home, giving them a second chance at life, and at the same time clearing space so that we can take in more dogs that need us. I've been asked many times, so how many dogs have you saved since you began? My answer is 0, not even 1. Behind every rescued dog is an enormous team that works together. And as part of the various teams that I have worked with, we must have saved hundreds of dogs in the city today. But not everything is sunshine, happy endings, fairy dust. This is emotionally very difficult work. We face heartbreak almost on a daily basis because we are acutely aware that for every dog that we manage to save, there are hundreds out there starving, beaten, abused, neglected. We see what human beings are capable of. Dogs flung out of speeding cars on expressways because they're no longer wanted. The most loving dogs that come to us with third-degree burns because someone thought of pouring boiling oil on their backs. Old dogs abandoned by breeders after they have been used to make puppies their entire life. Blind and deaf old dogs just left to sit by the side of the road. It becomes very easy to start repeating the cliches. Human beings are the most cruel species on the planet. Human beings are awful. But if there's one lesson I have learned from the hundreds of rescued dogs that have passed through my life, it is this: keep the faith. Keep the faith. And I choose instead to focus my energy on some of the most incredible people I have met through my line of work. People that represent everything that's kind, brave, and beautiful in this world. And together, we have crafted some amazing stories for so many dogs. And I'd like to share a couple of them with you. This is Pepper, a really old Dachshund that we found wandering on the road, abandoned because, well, he was old. Vet said that he had barely 6 months to live because his heart, kidney, liver, everything was failing him. We approached a family in Sakleshpur and just took a chance and asked if they would adopt him, and they readily agreed. He lived on a coffee estate, enjoying fresh air, cuddles from his family, yummy food. He lived for only a month after he got adopted, but he did not die alone and unwanted on the streets. This is Jack, another boy who was found abandoned on the road. He's a mixed breed, God knows what's in him. He had a maggot infestation so bad that his entire bone was visible from his shoulder to his paw, and his arm had to be amputated when he arrived. But through it all, he had the most generous, forgiving, joyful heart. A couple walked into the shelter wanting to adopt their first ever dog, and as is the norm, wanted a cute little perfect puppy. But the more time they spent with this goofball, they could not see anything beyond that stupid grin and those warm brown eyes, and they took him home. His disability did not matter to them at all, and he lives the life of a king, the life that's going to be his for as long as he's alive. This is Twinkle, a golden retriever bought as a status symbol only to be kept chained up outside her house 24/7 for 2 years. When she was rescued and she came to the shelter, she made it very clear to everyone that she loved water. She was always splashing about in all the water bowls that were available, rolling about in water. She made it really clear that she loved water. So when an opportunity opened up for her to be adopted onto a beach property in the Havelock Island, we said, well, we have to do this, but how? From Bangalore to the Andamans, we're going to fly a dog out where we barely make enough money to, meet medical expenses. How are we going to do this? But you know what? Strangers came together to create magic for this little girl. The adopter who offered to pay every last paisa that involved flying her from here to there, he said, just get me my girl, I'll pay for everything. And he had not even met her. We had a stranger from Chennai who saw this on social media and sent us her duster so that madam could travel in style from here to Chennai. We had a volunteer who drove down to pick her up and flew with her from Chennai to Port Blair to drop her off. Now, the thought must have started to occur to several of you. Wow, that's a lot of time, effort, and money spent on just a dog. You know, so many people ask me all the time, but why dogs? There are so many human beings suffering out there. Why don't you use your money and effort to help to save them instead? At this point, with your permission, I'd like to be John Lennon for just a minute, because I'm going to ask you to imagine. Imagine a world where none of us have the time to question the life's work of another person. Imagine if each of us chose instead to sit quietly for a moment and listen to what calls out to our souls the most. It could be anything. It could be elephants who are chained and tortured in temples, malnourishment in children, depleting forest covers, women being bought and sold as sex slaves. It could be anything. And imagine if each of us had the courage to step up and do something and follow the voice of our calling. It does not require a superhero to do it. None of us walk around with capes, definitely no underwear on our pants. Each of us is as ordinary as the person next to us. But we each have the innate potential to be extraordinary. That potential is tapped into every time life throws us in certain situations which make us angry, frustrated, and sad. And in these situations, we have two choices. One, we put on our blinkers, turn away, and continue to trudge through the mundaneness of our everyday existence. It's the era of social media. Maybe we could put up a status update, have everyone on our friend list debate about it. If you're celebrities, the nation will want to know what we're talking about. There's a second choice. We roll up our sleeves, we dig our heels in, and do something. Do something to make that situation better. And if you make that choice, I promise you this much. Our hearts will split wide open with sinking feelings of despair and hopelessness on a regular basis. But more often, our hearts will soar with unparalleled feelings of achievement and purpose. Our hearts will contract with pain that's almost unbearable. But more often, it will expand exponentially with joy that you would have never experienced before. A contracting and expanding heart is a beating heart, a heart that's alive. And I hope that more of us increasingly choose every single day to live with a beating heart, a heart that's alive with the practice of active compassion. Let's choose to have a still heart only when we are dead. Thank you.